Hello and welcome to another episode of Reading Together from Sea Harp Press. I'm Eugene Luning, co-founder of Sea Harp, and today we'll be continuing our journey through C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. In the last episode, we were in Book 2, Chapter 2. Today we'll be in Book 2, Chapter 3. The title of this chapter is The Shocking Alternative. And in case you didn't get to our last episode, in it, he was dealing with this idea that there really are just maybe two options. There is what the Christian believes, and then sort of this generic dualism. Well, here he's going to be going into a new section called, again, the shocking alternative. Christians, then, believe that an evil power has made himself, for the present, the prince of this world. And of course, that raises problems. Is this state of affairs in accordance with God's will or not? If it is, he is a strange God, you will say. And if it is not, how can anything happen contrary to the will of a being with absolute power? But anyone who has been in authority knows how a thing can be in accordance with your will in one way and not in another. It may be quite sensible for a mother to say to the children, I'm not going to go and make you tidy the schoolroom every night. You've got to learn to keep it tidy on your own. Then she goes up one night and finds the teddy bear and the ink and the French grammar all lying in the grate. That is against her will. She would prefer the children to be tidy, but on the other hand, it is her will which has left the children free to be untidy. The same thing arises in any regiment or trade union or school. You make a thing voluntary, and then half the people do not do it. That is not what you willed, but your will has made it possible. That's an interesting play on the words will and willed, one of which is a noun and one of which is a verb. But both can coexist and both have meaningfulness, especially in the economy of a God who gives us free will. I'll keep reading. It is probably the same in the universe. God created things which had free will. That means creatures which can go either wrong or right. Some people think they can imagine a creature which was free but had no possibility of going wrong. I cannot. If a thing is free to be good, it is also free to be bad. And free will is what has made evil possible. Why then did God give them free will? Because free will, though it makes evil possible, is also the only thing that makes possible any love or goodness or joy worth having. A world of automata, of creatures that worked like machines, would hardly be worth creating. The happiness which God designs for his higher creatures is the happiness of being freely, voluntarily united to him and to each other in an ecstasy of love and delight, compared with which the most rapturous love between a man and a woman on this earth is mere milk and water. And for that, they must be free. Of course, God knew what would happen if they used their freedom the wrong way. Apparently, he thought it worth the risk. What an interesting way to say that. I'll read it again. Of course, God knew what would happen if they used their freedom the wrong way. Listen, apparently, he thought it worth the risk. Perhaps we feel inclined to disagree with him, but there is a difficulty about disagreeing with God. He is the source from which all your reasoning power comes. You could not be right and he wrong any more than a stream can rise higher than its source. When you are arguing against him, you are arguing against the very power that makes you able to argue at all. It is like cutting off the branch you are sitting on. If God thinks this state of war in the universe a price worth paying for free will, that is, for making a live world in which creatures can do real good or harm, and something of real importance can happen instead of a toy world which only moves when he pulls the strings, then he may take it. It is worth paying. And I want to pause here and give let's call it a shout out or a nod to my friends who are deep Calvinists. We're talking tulip. They've really believed that that is what Paul is telling us in the bulk of the epistles of the New Testament. Well, you're going to be disagreeing with aspects of what's just been said in terms of our free will, our ability to actually make choices that are contingent and that have meaningful cause and effect. Well, okay, that's great. And I do respect that there are great arguments for where you stand. For those of you who really do believe in the concept of free will, well, you can understand what Lewis is saying here. That our ability to argue with it is contingent, again, upon this fact that the God who made us is also the God that we're trying to argue against, arguing, in fact, against his wisdom and sovereignty. Here's one of my observations, because I'm in sort of like life-on-life ministry. I'm with people every day. In fact, I've got a meeting with a guy shortly. And often what I find when people want to have arguments about free will versus sort of a determinism or predestination is that typically they want to have a sense of free will, except as it pertains to things that are bad for them. They would prefer that when things are bad, this is sort of the problem of evil, the problem of pain. When things are bad, that's where they want God to step in. Where things are going well, they want a completely untrammeled free will. Friends, I think we just need to take God as God is. He has given us the ability to make choices. I've made a choice to sit in my lovely houndstooth chair and record this video for you because I care about you, because I care about these wonderful timeless words. These are choices I'm making. They're incremental. They're micro choices. I do not believe that God has nothing to do with the fact that he's called me to know him. I do believe that there's something lovely about the way that he has chosen us, but I do think there's aspects of how we get to choose him that are glorious, powerful, and that are deeply meaningful in the everyday of our everyday life. So however you fall in terms of this sort of Arminian versus Calvinist, blessings upon you. Why don't we use what we at least perceive to be free wills to continue to learn, to follow Jesus in the everyday, and to love everyone we ever meet with his love. Doesn't that sound like a good choice of either our free will or something that's been determined for us to do? I think so. When we have understood about free will, we shall see how silly it is to ask, as somebody once asked me, why did God make a creature of such rotten stuff that it went wrong? The better stuff a creature is made of, the cleverer and stronger and freer it is, then the better it will be if it goes right, but also the worse it will be if it goes wrong. A cow cannot be very good or very bad. A dog can be both better and worse. A child better and worse still. An ordinary man still more so. A man of genius still more so. A superhuman spirit best or worst of all. How did the dark power go wrong? Here, no doubt, we ask a question to which human beings cannot give an answer with any certainty. A reasonable and traditional guess, based on our own experiences of going wrong, can, however, be offered. The moment you have a self at all, there is a possibility of putting yourself first, wanting to be the center, wanting to be God, in fact. That was the sin of Satan. And that was the sin he taught the human race. Some people think the fall of man had something to do with sex, but that is a mistake. The story in the book of Genesis rather suggests that some corruption in our sexual nature followed the fall and was its result, not its cause. What Satan put into the heads of our remote ancestors was the idea that they could be like gods, could set up on their own as if they had created themselves, be their own masters, invent some sort of happiness for themselves outside God, apart from God. And out of that hopeless attempt has come nearly all that we call human history. Money, poverty, ambition, war, prostitution, classes, empires, slavery. The long, terrible story of man trying to find something other than God, which will make him happy. It's interesting because just this morning, my daughter, who is just about to turn 16, we were driving to school and we were talking about the nature of, frankly, some news that we've been reading lately that is so tragic, so hateful. And we had really a quite deep conversation just in the few minutes before we got to school about the fact that all of the brokenness of the world is kind of the unspooling of the choice to not love, to make oneself the center of human existence, and to really negate the existence of God by our choice to make ourselves into God, hateful, unseeing, and uncaring. Friends, I think if you and I had been Adam and Eve, I think we would have fallen too. I think that whisper of trying to put ourselves at the very center, to make ourselves absolutely everything in our own eyes, is just something too tempting not to test. It breaks everything. It separates us from God. It certainly breaks relationship with our fellow man and leads to the kind of hatefulness that on this day in my human life I was reading about in the news this morning. The beauty of what Jesus has done is that by inserting himself in a human flesh, he has shown us that there is in fact another way. It is a way predicated in love. It is completely about the will of the Father, union life. And it's the life we've been invited into. And friends, again, with our free will, we can test it out. We can come to him and surrender ourselves, be made new, and then go out and make the world new. Show the world that there's a different way of living. It's a true adventure. And it's, again, sourced in love. The reason why, and this is not to answer myself just now, the reason why it can never succeed is this. God made us, invented us as a man invents an engine. A car is made to run on petrol, gas, and it would not run properly on anything else. Now, God designed the human machine to run on himself. He himself is the fuel our spirits were designed to burn, or the food our spirits were designed to feed on. There is no other. That is why it is just no good asking God to make us happy in our own way without bothering about religion. God cannot give us a happiness and peace apart from himself because it is not there. There is no such thing. That is the key to history. Terrific energy is expended. Civilizations are built up. Excellent institutions devised. But each time, something goes wrong. Some fatal flaw always brings the selfish and cruel people to the top, and it all slides back into misery and ruin. In fact, the machine conks. It seems to start up all right and run a few yards, and then it breaks down. They are trying to run it on the wrong juice. That is what Satan has done to us humans. And what did God do? First of all, he left us conscience, the sense of right and wrong. And all through history, there have been people trying, some of them very hard, to obey it. None of them ever quite succeeded. Secondly, he sent the human race what I call good dreams. I mean those queer stories scattered all throughout the heathen religions about a God who dies and comes to life again, and by his death has somehow given new life to men. Thirdly, he selected one particular people and spent several centuries hammering into their heads the sort of God he was. That there was only one of him, and that he cared about right conduct. Those people were the Jews, and the Old Testament gives an account of the hammering process. And I'm going to pause there. I want to recapitulate what's just been said. The Lord God has given us conscience, this innate, inborn thing that's difficult to explain, but seems to be allied to natural law, the basic sense of right and wrong. That's the first. The second, and then this is a fascinating way that Lewis pulls the rug out from under that classic sort of negative apologetic, well, isn't the Christ story really found all over the place? Isn't that something that's older than the Christian faith? Well, Lewis says, well, yes, there has been this distant, haunting dream that there would be, that perhaps there had been an actual figure like God who would set us free by his own suffering and love for us. And then thirdly, the Jewish people. The fact that the Old Covenant bears a great deal of importance. You have to remember that Lewis was speaking these words during the time of the great anti-Semitism of the Third Reich. That those people in the UK and in the broader world were starting to get a sense of a great hatefulness against this people. So for Lewis to say this is stout. He says those people actually bear the imprint of God's choice. So these three, conscience, that distant haunting dream, and the Jewish people, this is his beginning of the argument for what God has been doing and how he has been revealing to himself to us. I'll continue. Then comes the real shock. Among these Jews, there suddenly turns up a man who goes about talking as if he was God. He claims to forgive sins. He says he has always existed. He says he is coming to judge the world at the end of time. Now let us get this clear. Among pantheists like the Indians, anyone might say that he was a part of God or one with God. There would be nothing very odd about it. But this man, since he was a Jew, could not mean that kind of God. God, in their language, meant the being outside the world, who had made it and was infinitely different from anything else. And when you have grasped this, you will see that what this man said was, quite simply, the most shocking thing that has ever been uttered by human lips. One part of the claim tends to slip past us unnoticed because we have heard it so often that we no longer see what it amounts to. I mean the claim to forgive sins, any sins. Now, unless the speaker is God, this is really so preposterous as to be comic. We can all understand how a man forgives offenses against himself. You tread on my toes and I forgive you. You steal my money and I forgive you. But what should we make of a man, himself unrobbed and untrodden on, who announced that he forgave you for treading on other men's toes and stealing other men's money? Asinine fatuity is the kindest description we should give of his conduct. Yet this is what Jesus did. He told people that their sins were forgiven and never waited to consult all the other people whom their sins had undoubtedly injured. He unhesitatingly behaved as if he was the party chiefly concerned, the person chiefly offended in all offenses. This makes sense only if he really was the God whose laws are broken and whose love is wounded in every sin. In the mouth of any speaker who is not God, these words would imply what I can only regard as a silliness and conceit unrivaled by any other character in history. And friends, I have to pause here. I've talked before with you in some of our other series about our sense of historical inevitability. You and I, who call ourselves Christians, we read the gospel accounts, and to us it is historically inevitable. Of course Jesus showed up. Of course he said these things. Of course the people, some, the religious people, didn't like it. Some who felt sort of outcast from the religious way of being loved it. Of course. Of course he went to the cross. Of course he came back from the dead. Friends, none of these things was an inevitability from our normal, day-by-day, humdrum human nature. For the Jewish people who had been waiting through those 400 years of silence between what we call Malachi and Matthew, between those two spaces, those people were completely observant of the Old Covenant. And they believed that in their monotheistic understanding of the world, that God was remote, removed, really mostly unknowable. Their sense of the Spirit of God was completely nebulous. They didn't understand how that part of what we call the Trinity worked. And friends, they had no vision, none at all, for a Son of God. In fact, when this man showed up, bearded, normal cloak and tunic, regular sandals on his feet, the idea that he could forgive sins, the idea that he would say that he was one with the Father, the fact that he even said there was a Father and that he was a Son, was essentially blasphemy, heresy. And yet into that race and in that day, that generation, Jesus came. He came to show us the flawless expression of the nature of God, as the epistle writer writes, so that we would actually know what God is like. And then by saying, I forgive sin, he began the process whereby sin is forever forgiven. How would it be completed? At the cross, which was not an inevitability from our side. That was a choice of God's. That was the way, that was the means by which he would effect the ends of our salvation. So if there's a part of you who has sat in church so long that all of this seems completely humdrum and mundane, I would just say to you, rescue yourself from that sense. Read in the Gospels, be aware of how shocking the way of Jesus, the life of Jesus was to people. That's what Lewis wants us to see. He's speaking into the context mostly of the Church of England of his day. For us here in the American church, friends, we need to be shocked by the propositions Jesus is bringing to the table. This is amazing. Awesome. All right, I'm going to finish out this chapter, chapter 3 of book 2. Yet, and this is the strange, significant thing, even his enemies, when they read the Gospels, do not usually get the impression of silliness and conceit. Still less do unprejudiced readers. Christ says that he is humble and meek, and we believe him, not noticing that if he were merely a man, humility and meekness are the very last characteristics we could attribute to some of his sayings. I am trying here to prevent anyone saying the really foolish thing that people often say about him. I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. That is the one thing we must not say. A man who was merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on a level with the man who says he is a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool. You can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to. This is perhaps, if people know a little bit about Lewis, one of the shorthands for knowing something of Lewis is the liar, the lunatic, the Lord. I love that Jesus, in fact, puts that line in the sand. He says, I am going to say things that would be utterly preposterous if I did not back them by my way of life and by my love. Lewis is saying to us, we cannot consider him sort of this Gandhi-like figure, just saying lovely things out there in the hinterlands of the Galilee, and sort of pick and choose what we want. That's just not a path that's open. Because either he is who he says he is, or he's an unbelievable liar, or a crazy person. Friends, I think today, and I always want to remind you, the battleground for the life of faith is always today. Well, today, you need to decide who he is. Is he in fact the Lord of your life? I love that Lewis echoes the sound of Thomas's voice from the end of John when Thomas falls down before the risen Jesus and he's so embarrassed of his doubt and he says, my Lord and my God. Friends, we need to do that too. We need to be confronted yet again with the person of Jesus and decide that for this day, I will follow him as Lord. And I will not only follow him as Lord, I will obey him. I will do those things that his Spirit asks me to do. I will love the unlovable. I will show courage in the face of hardship, just like the early church did, so that others would know he is alive. Friends, he is so good, so wild, so shocking to our religious sensibilities. I would encourage and invite you to be shocked all over again. We have been in Book 2, Chapter 3 of Mere Christianity, and I'm so grateful that you're with me on this journey, and I cannot wait to sit right here and record our next episode in the next chapter. Thanks for joining me. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.